Innovation distinguishes a leader from a follower. But innovation is facing a challenging time. Will it bend to geopolitics? Can it continue as an inspiring and disruptive force? Will it still find a way to improve the world? Do join me on Let Innovation Speak, World Insight Special on Summer Davos 2019 only on CGTN. Hello and welcome to a special edition of World Insight coming to you from Summer Davos 2019. Let Innovation Speak. I'm Tian Wei. Chinese Premier Elka Pangestu said Tuesday at the World Economic Forum for New Champions that China would speed up its opening up of various sectors and that China was determined to stick to the path of openness no matter the circumstance.
We need to follow the trend of globalization and promote free trade and trade investment, liberalization and facilitation. We need to promote equal rights, equal opportunities, and fair rules, and improve institutional arrangements on that basis.
At the same time, he said China was committed to the reform of WTO and the rule-based trading order. This is especially significant after the G20 agreed to WTO reform in the final declaration.
The rules-based and WTO-centered multilateral trading system is the foundation of economic globalization and free trade. It also safeguards the world's economy's stable growth. We must respect and protect its authority and effectiveness. China supports the necessary WTO reforms, but the principle of free trade must be upheld.
On the sideline of the Summer Davos in Dalian, we talked to Dr. Elka Pangestu, a professor at the University of Indonesia. She's also former Minister of Trade of Indonesia. Also with us in the discussion, Benjamin Harburg, a managing partner from MSA Capital. Marie and Ben, welcome to CGTN. Thank you so much for sharing your time.
Thank you.
First question, G20 summit concluded with a declaration and in it several key words about trade, climate change, and many other issues. Marie, what is your take of it as a long-time trade minister coming from Indonesia?
Well, you said it well. At least there was a communique. I kind of followed the drama on the trade paragraphs quite closely. And while we were disappointed that the fight against protectionism was not in there and multilateral rules-based trading system didn't really make it, but at least there's some language there about the need for WTO reform. And I think the other disappointing thing is that there's no description of the way forward. Because I think G20 can play a very important role as kind of the political will to push the processes that has to happen in Geneva for the WTO reforms to actually take place. And the urgency is rescuing the dispute settlement system, because that's very important for small countries like Indonesia. That's the way you can actually also resolve the trade tensions between these two big elephants. We are kind of watching these two big elephants fight and trying to get out of the way, but we really can't get out of the way. And then all the needed WTO reforms to keep WTO relevant, whether it's the technology, the e-commerce, or the subsidies issue. It needs to have a longer-term agenda to address these very strategic issues. So,
what does that mean to investors like you?
I think it means, certainly in China, a focus on developing core technology, so investing in chips, AI, algorithms, so areas that China had often relied on the United States for, or inputs from research strategies from U.S. universities or corporates. I think there will be a lot less of that collaboration. We've already seen cancer researchers pulled out of U.S. universities now, and chip makers returning home. I think it creates opportunities in China in the long term. I think China will develop native.
Domestic market probably will play a bigger role. Do you agree, Marie? What does that mean for the other economies, for example, Indonesia?
think it's a double-edged sword, but I think what's going to happen is like a reconfiguration of investment as well as trade. And I think what we need to do is two things. I think uncertainty with the trading system is still going to be very damaging for us, despite the opportunity for relocation.
Because that's a dampening effect on the economy as a whole.
Right, and China's economy, which is our largest trading partner now, right? So I think we still have to keep focus on making sure that somehow there can be a way out that is not the deal between the two countries alone. Because if they're trying to make a deal, and we know the issues are going beyond the tariffs and deficit issue, it's got subsidies, technology, state-owned enterprises, more competitive environment, etc., etc. It's better to deal with that under a WTO umbrella rather than bilaterally, because bilaterally I think they can create their own rules, and then where are we going to be at, the other countries who are not party to.
I think that's a question a lot of countries are asking, a lot of economies are asking, whether they are relevant in the overall process. But on the other hand, you also see, Marie, other countries do not want to come into this debate at this moment, because when two of the largest economies in the world are debating, you do not want to be this collateral damage in the very middle of it. So how to make sure, from an economy like yours, the best degree to engage and disengage all at the same time? That's a very tricky and artful skill, I guess, you have to have. Marie.
So I think we don't want to be trampled, and we don't want to have to take sides. So we need to continue engaging both with the U.S. and China in as much as possible that we can, because Indonesia is also, I think, number 15 out of the deficit countries. So we are facing our own bilateral issues, and at the same time we need to push regional economic integration. So push opening up further our markets between each other, and it's not just for a regional bloc. It's actually going to benefit globally, and also seek partnerships with major partners like Europe. Vietnam has just signed an FTA, a CEPA, I should say, a partnership agreement with EU. Indonesia is negotiating with the EU. Hopefully by next year it will be completed. So you continue expanding to reduce the uncertainty as much as you can. But at the end of the day, the rules-based trading system on all those issues that are on the table needs to happen sooner or later.
Marie gave a very comprehensive and sophisticated solution list already as to how an economy uprising like Indonesia, but also very vibrant as well, need to deal with the situation. But there are a lot of uncertainties while Marie was trying to illustrate this sophisticated plan. And therefore, shouldn't the U.S. and China also feel encouraged and urged, in a way, by all the other economies to come to the table and come out with a reasonable, whether it's a bilateral deal or the deal that could be inspiring to the others as well? Ben?
Yeah, I think unfortunately this is an administration that's retrenching from multilateral institutions across the board.
It's just a matter of fact.
Yeah, climate change, the United Nations, WTO, it doesn't matter. It's now become a bilateral world where we deal countries one-on-one, and we use the power of tariffs, even in contexts where they might not apply.
So you're saying, Marie, don't dream anymore. It's reality.
I'm a pragmatist. You might be.
But here is the thing. What about the other options? Marie earlier raised a few of them. For example, regionalization. For example, bilateral and multilateral cooperation on various platforms, as many as possible, as good quality as possible. Then will that be a good opportunity for investors? This is a new picture for you guys, I guess.
Absolutely. So I mean, this block of Southeast Asia, which is 600,000 or 600 million
and ASEAN +1, +2, +3, +6 right now.
Or MENA, what we call now MENA TP, MENA plus Turkey and Pakistan, 530 million people.
Africa even.
Right. So these are massive markets with relatively similar kind of consumer taste, relatively similar in terms of their evolution, in terms of technology adoption. And so you can create companies that are regional plays, like you have in Southeast Asia, the ride-sharing giants or e-commerce giants, and those become massive opportunities for investors globally to tap into, and we've been chasing that.
The other thing, of course, is about the WTO reform. As you all talk about, the multilateral approach is the best approach for economies of all sizes. So let's talk about WTO reform. Now, in the G20 Declaration, there is a thing called the WTO reform being mentioned, and yet some people suggest that there are different interpretations as to why those words are being put into the original script by different economies. So Ben, from the investor's perspective, of course, WTO is so far away from you in a way because you don't have to deal with that mechanism every day. But at the same time, its reform will have a huge impact on how trade will be done, investment opportunities. How do you see that?
The key word for us is uncertainty, right? If there is not a framework for these types of collaboration and we can have ad hoc moments like we've had over the last few months, that jeopardizes businesses, that jeopardizes supply chains, that makes people want to hold their money back and not invest in.
And it's already happening, I have to say.
Right. I mean, if you look at the amount of money now that Chinese money is no longer going into America, there's potential that these capital markets become balkanized, and Chinese companies come back home and American capital stays home. If you took what Bannon is trying to do to heart, right? And so the fear is that it enables a world that is divided and hurts trade at the end of the day and hurts countries from rising up.
So WTO reform, as complicated as it is, I'm having a big sigh when I'm saying it, Marie, but you, as a former trade minister, have to deal with that for a long time, and now certainly a more dramatic time to deal with it. What do you consider are the most important obstacles facing us right now?
Well, I think Ben said it very well. I think the uncertainty is increased, and it's because the rules base is being questioned or even sidelined. They're ignoring the rules, which creates a lot of uncertainty. And uncertainty means greater cost for business, and then that means consumers are going to have to pay more, right? So I think there's going to,
at the end of the day, no matter how politically they are framing this.
Yeah. So there's all these numbers. American consumers are presumably paying what, $2,000 if the whole thing is going to be tarified. They're going to pay I think $2,200 more per family per year for their goods. So
we see various numbers coming out.
And I think the urgency of the WTO reforms is, first of all, it's dispute settlement, because you can have trade conflicts. In the past, it's been resolved by the dispute settlement, and then you continue your trade and investment.
And that's the teeth of WTO.
And that's the most urgent issue to reform, because it is, the panel judges are expiring at the end of the year, and then you have no more judges, then you cannot have a panel, right? So that's the most urgent one. And then you have to identify issues which can only be solved at the multilateral level.
Like what? Like what?
Subsidies. Subsidies cannot be done at a regional level. It has to be done at a multilateral level. So it's the agriculture subsidies, which is the remaining issues, and the industrial subsidies. Yeah? And then things like technology, all the e-commerce agreement and what to do with technology and data flows, that also has to be done at a multilateral level. And this is very important because, as we know, this is one of the the disruptions that are happening. And if you want to benefit from it, you really need the rules and the governance and the security issues to be dealt with and so on.
But the question really is, Ben, given your fascination about geopolitics as an investor, what about whether WTO reform will be caught in the crossfire of geopolitics? I guess it's already, and therefore putting much more difficulty in the real reform and the real discussion of WTO.
I think so. I think especially from the U.S. context, a lot of what's being done is driving votes domestically, right? These are now things to appeal to domestic voters and not necessarily to the business leaders and the bureaucrats who really understand these issues at a high level. And so when that becomes one of the major considerations in a negotiation, it's very difficult to deal with things in a long-term context, which is what's needed to solidify this framework.
And Madam Minister?
I think we need, in the vacuum of leadership from the U.S., the others have to step up, whether it's China, whether it's EU, whether it's Japan, whether it's ASEAN. There needs to be more of a collective leadership.
But we don't have a blueprint that were earlier worked out, right? After the Second World War, you have the Bretton Woods system in which everything quite clearly mapped out. But now it seems to be a lot of moving parts, and nobody knows and who should be, in a way, responsible for putting things together, Madam Minister?
Yeah, there's no roadmap, but I think what needs to happen is those countries like ASEAN is, trade is very important. It's been the mainstay for our growth and development for the last 3 decades. So for us, trade is very important. So I think there has to be, in the past we relied on U.S. U.S. was playing a leadership role. Now in that vacuum, who has to step up? How should we be stepping up to that leadership role? And I think that's crucial in the absence of the U.S. I don't know when they're going to come back to the table.
Ben, do you have more information?
If I have anything to say about it, we will. I mean, this role of abdicating our role of leadership is the wrong approach.
But then, Madam Minister, how is the most important thing, isn't it? When you are saying fill in the vacuum of leadership, let others also work together towards some solution. But how? That is the question being asked.
I think a few of the middle powers need to step up. I mean, G20 was an attempt. And a lot of the regional agreements can already address some of the issues. But
like what? Like what?
Like you take e-commerce agreement, CPTPP, does have a chapter on e-commerce. It can be the template for any future agreements on this. It's maybe not the right one, but at least it's the beginning of a conversation, and it can inform the rules in the multilateral negotiations later on.
Ben, any input?
Yeah, I think that this framework needs to be put in place across the board. Everything we do, from payment solutions, the infrastructure that's driving and guiding all of our investments, that will filter down into all of those customer-level companies, require that kind of framework at a higher level, and can be done regionally or internationally.
And we are at a multilateral framework anyway. I mean, the World Economic Forum itself is a multilateral approach. Before we go, what do you think is the most important message when we think about the future, the immediate and probably a bit longer term as well? Ben, I want to go with you first, and then Marie, please.
What I'm trying to work towards as a person and as a business is to bring a world that's more integrated and less siloed, where research is collaborative, where countries work to solve these problems in international fora, and where supply chains are integrated. And we're moving away from that, and that deeply frightens me.
Marie.
I think we have to address the uncertainty issue, and it's not just trade, it's the technology, it's the climate change, and that needs leadership as well as a short-term action and a medium-term, more strategic plan.
Absolutely. Marie, Ben, thank you so much for sharing your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're watching Let Innovation Speak, a special edition of World Insight coming to you from Summer Davos 2019. We'll be back after this. With the world changes, emerging developing countries all develop at a rapid speed. But the question really is, how are you going to make your voice heard and be able to take others with you on the development path? Governor Chea, you have some thoughts for us?
Yes, I think for developing countries, because we are sort of coming later at the development stage, we have the opportunity to learn from what has been done before. And a new initiative that the National Bank of Cambodia has been testing on is a backbone payment system that uses blockchain technology. So we are going to hopefully to launch a pilot on a real environment sometime this month. And I think there's a lot of central bank studying on this technology. The problem is these are very big central bank having a very efficient system already. So it's very difficult to try to bring something that is going to disrupt and where you're very uncertain about the risk. In our case, we don't have anything to disrupt, really, because and so we're bringing this new technology into usage because it's going to make our system efficient and not trying to disrupt anything really.
That's a really interesting case study, isn't it, Professor Zhu, that emerging and developing countries could really do this leapfrog in a way. being disruptive but not disrupting anything in a way. So how do you see that example, and how is that related to China's own experience?
China is sort of successful in setting itself as one-off example for the successful example for leapfrogging. I mean, think about our 3G, 4G network. I mean, we used to have no cellular network at all in China 30 years ago. But then it's because we didn't have anything. We don't have to wait and trying to amortize all the investment we have made before. So that's why I think we're very aggressive with making big investment, which is pushing the economy or pushing the network services at a much faster pace than for more developed economies such as the U.S.
So now there's 5G.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's also part of the reason why I think China is such a clear leader in 5G, in mobile payment, in mobile internet, because we don't have those constraints. We want to just always get the newest technology, the best things we could imagine of. So I think that's a successful example by itself. But then I think in addition to that, I think China's attempt to go global with the Belt and Road Initiative, I think we're also sort of trying to bring our lessons or bring our successful examples to other countries.
But you know, Professor Zhu, Governor Chea plays a beautiful example and case study for us, but that's from Cambodia. Geographically speaking, it is still much smaller than China's size, and also China's today is the second largest economy when it comes to nations in the world, and therefore the geopolitics also come into being. So on the one hand, you do have comparison with one another. On the other hand, China is a very special case. So Professor Zhu, obviously it's not just about what you want to do. It's also about whether others would do it with you or do it against you, Professor Zhu.
I think there are two things that China is trying very hard. One is, well, compared to the current developed economies, China is different. China comes from a very different cultural background, a very different history. So I think that's making China very different. But that's also making China very relatable to many other emerging economies which share the similar experiences. So I think that's a very important way of, if a country like China can put itself from poverty, can become such a successful example, then many other countries can do the same. It's just about the pace or the route which different country would choose to adopt.
There were stories talking about different kinds of Chinese investment, for example, into the country of Cambodia along the Belt and Road Initiative. And some of those investments are having some challenges, while others suggesting whether the Chinese is coming over and take all. And also there are others wondering whether labor standards and environment will be further enhanced or violated. Governor Chea, you've been working on the field and certainly at the National Bank as well on these issues. Tell us more about what is your take and assessment.
I think there's, in terms of Chinese investment going into Cambodia, it's constituted about 1/3 of our overall foreign direct investment into the country. And I've been looking for some statistics before coming here, and we see that about 60% of those investment goes into hydropower, agriculture, and garment, so manufacturing industries. So that's 60%, and the remaining go into real estate. And I think that's very important as a developing country to see investment going to electricity, because that's what we need. And we're now talking about the fourth industrial revolution. You're going to use a lot of technology, but you know the underlying prerequisite is electricity. So we're glad to see this happen. Having said that, we do also see, you know, Chinese investors, but on an isolated case that has created some sort of negative perceptions about China. But this is something that the government of Cambodia is working very closely with the Chinese embassy to try to tackle. And I think everywhere you have a good and bad people, so you can't just generalize all this.
Regulation like, implementation of regulation like, how is the country of Cambodia trying to make sure some of the areas that you just touched on, which is to the very interest of Cambodia, will be enforced?
Cambodia is a newly developed country.
Right.
We had a past very bitter histories of genocide and civil war. So, and within the last sort of 10 years, we've been receiving so much interest from foreign investors, foreign direct investment. And I think I have to admit that for the government it's also a bit overwhelming to have everything flowing all at the same time. But we're looking into reviewing our investment law, trying to make things, make the situation better for the investors, but also for the locals, for the country.
What do you think, Professor Zhu, when Governor Chea is talking about, oh, let's work on this foreign investment law, which China worked on in the very late 1970s, early 1980s, and now is having a different version, newer version of it. What do you think can be the node comparison, among these countries, China included?
Three main areas where I think many emerging economies share in common. One is typically they have a relatively lower income, which can be used as a comparative advantage when it comes down to export industry. So I think that's one route that the entire Eastern Asia countries have been using, starting with Japan. Then we have the little dragons of Southeast Asia. Then we have China.
That's right.
The second area, I think, is what China is really successful with is the industrial policy. I think also starting with Japan, most, if not all, East Asian countries are using government-led industrial policy, which is trying to focus on one or few major areas which will boost the economy, and then it will just keep upgrading its industrial policy over time. Three, which I think China is doing very well, but of course it is having its own share of risks, is infrastructure investment. I mean, China has now the state-of-the-art infrastructure in the entire world. If you go to the high-speed train system, the airports, the bridges, it's really overwhelming and impressive. I think that is one very successful example of China, but at the same time, we have to keep in mind not all countries have the fiscal might to support such large investment. So I think there is a fine balance in there which we have to strike.
Governor Chea, you think about it, the election cycle, 4 years. So they try to come in and do things as fast as possible so that it will become the legacy. But as we all know, things doesn't work that way if it is naturally done. And also, in different parts of the world, you do have different culture. You have to understand rather than impose the result. So I wonder, really, that is a culture thing, or is it a governance thing, or a mixture of a lot of elements there?
Nowadays, you have policymakers trying to fit everything in within their mandate, which can't be happening.
But then what does that mean for Cambodia? Because if you think about economy like Vietnam, certainly some factories move over there as a result of a discussion of where likely to be another place that's going to nurture manufacturing after China, for example, which China has have this elevation of manufacturing in the future. So what about Cambodia? How is Cambodia prepared for some different kinds of moments for your manufacturing and for your economy?
I think generally there is a study by the IMF that as a result of trade war, the Southeast Asian country will stand to benefit some sort in the short term, because then you would see a relocations of manufacturing bases to this part of the world. But I think in the long term, there's always risk, because Cambodia and China has a lot of trade together. So it's more Cambodia importing from China in terms of goods, but investments are from China. So if something happened to the Chinese economy, if it had to slow down or anything, we would feel the impact as well.
What about for you, Professor Zhu? After the shake hands moment at the G20 between the two leaders, do you see we're having really more momentum, or at least opportunities for momentum?
I think there are two things we have to watch out for. One is, well, I think President Trump probably need to be more consistent with his message or with his tweets, because he sort of changed his attitudes overnight, and it's a little difficult to interpret exactly what is going on. Two, I think on the global basis, I totally agree with Governor Chea in the sense that, well, I hope there is a global consensus that, well, the G2, the two major powers of the world economy, should, in the grand scheme of things, work together, not maybe just for the sake of these two countries' interests, but for the interest of the global economy.
That, of course, takes a much bigger vision. as we know, since there are already differences between China and the U.S. about what to concentrate on. If you look at the statement coming out, the Chinese President Xi Jinping is concentrating on more the nature of this bilateral relationship. It's a comprehensive relationship, while President Trump from the U.S. side more is talking about deal or no deal, what kind of deal, at what time the deal. So there obviously are kinds of vision differences between the two. Will that be more challenging for the negotiation? It will still have to wait and see. But during this time, my final question before we go, what does that mean for the economies? Let's go to your economy first. You talk about the Governor Chea, the close relationship between China and Cambodia when it comes to economic ties. So how would you be able to be at least flexible, while at the same time make sure your best interests are being protected?
And that's exactly what the new investment law is going to look at. We have an industrial policy strategy looking at strengthening, making the economy more resilient. And there's four main concentrations. One is human capital, so focusing on our education system, vocational training. Second is on logistics. Make it more sort of attractive for investors to come in, and particularly so because Cambodia is quite geographically well situated right at the center of ASEAN. So how can we make ourselves relevant in the in regional value chain? The third is on agri-industry, which is very important for us. And I think we have a lot of unexploited soil that could be, you know, a great source of food. And if you look at, you know, how many people there is in China to feed, I think it can turn into Cambodia and exploit that. And the fourth is SME development. We want to strengthen our SMEs and get them out there in the region and hopefully to the world. So these are some of the policy that is already in place, and trying to make sure that we are resilient, trying to diversify our manufacturing base, because currently we're relying on garment and shoes. But gradually now we've seen our manufacturing industry going towards microchip and cars assemblies, bicycle assemblies. It's a slow diversification, but it's happening. So this is how we try. A
very ambitious plan, I have to say.
Well, we have to be ambitious.
And what about you, for you, Professor Zhu, at this time of great change?
As far as China is concerned, I think there are three things. One is, I think, trying to go on whatever it has been doing very well with, so don't give in to the external pressure just for the matter of it. Two, I think China has to think harder about, well, certain of the demands from the U.S. side or from overseas is in China's interest about the structural reform. So I think China has to think harder about how to push forward some of the reforms which has been on the agenda, but which has not progressed as well or as fast as people were hoping for, definitely not at the pace of what Cambodia is experiencing. Lastly, I think, I totally agree with Governor Chea about, well, I think no matter what you say, I think the upgrade in the industry will happen over time. So I think China should keep confidence and remain calm with, okay, over time, I think the huge size of China's economy and with China's hard-working spirits, I think we will gradually grow over this so-called middle income trap, and then I think we don't have to say that much. I think the rest of the world will see what we have been achieving over this entire path.
Amid uncertainties and transitions, the World Economic Forum, being a platform for various players, could play a great conduit in communicating ideas and even brainstorming about solutions. On that, we have the head of programming with the World Economic Forum. I really wonder, as the organizer of the Summer Davos, how would you be able to really grasp the real theme of the world, the one that is really beneath skin deep, about where the world is heading for? It's difficult, isn't it, during the daily fluffy things going on?
It's difficult because the world is getting more complex and there are just many things happening at the same time. The World Economic Forum is an international organization and not a conference organizer. That means that we are involved in many debates on a year-long basis, and we have a big network to tap into. We have close collaborations with many of the G20 countries. We just signed an MOU with the United Nations 2 weeks ago, so this is our core source of information. So all the things that we do are happening in collaboration with our partners and governments and international organizations.
Multilateralism, of course, is a key word in a way for World Economic Forum, but you know that was quite a buzzword during the G20 summit held in Osaka just earlier. And there was such a debate about whether that word could be put into the final declaration even. So do we have to hide the word, which is in everybody's daily practice?
We don't need to hide this word. Multilateralism is important. There are many challenges that the world can only resolve together. Climate change is one of these examples. We are very much focused on trade tensions and so on at the moment, but there are many problems that don't stop at borders. Climate change is one of these problems, and multilateralism will be needed to address these challenges, in my view.
What do you think, how much being discussed here can infiltrate or be able to feed, provide the nutrition for real policy debate?
So what the World Economic Forum is trying here is not necessarily to, and we don't vote on any laws here, obviously. What we are doing is we want to synchronize people's mind. We want people to get on a common page for decision making. And that's sometimes what's holding back the political process, a lack of consultation, a lack of alignment on what are actually our shared values, what are our shared concerns, and that's something that we're building. We have more than 2,000 participants, we have more than 1,000 participants from business, many of them very high level. It's the most international meeting that we have ever run in China with 70% global participants, and many of them are concerned about topics like cybersecurity.
When you are designing the theme of this year's Summer Davos, you work with your team around the world. You talk to scholars, experts, people in the know, policymakers, even on the background issue. So what are the issues that are on top of their blank paper when you are talking to them?
Well, there are 4 main concerns that we believe are more and more on the mind not only of policymakers but also of business leaders. There's one major concern that is clearly around technology governance, what we said before, and with many of the new technologies maturing from 5G to artificial intelligence, that's one area. Another big area, and we are being reminded of this every day, there's a huge heat wave at the moment in Europe, for instance, is climate change. And more people realize that there are also financial risks attached to that, economic risks to that. The third area that you already mentioned, of course, geopolitical tensions. And then the fourth area are societal tensions, societal polarization, which is something that is happening at the same time as societies are growing, economies are growing. So we have to address this as well. And many of these things are interconnected. You cannot look at one without the other. So those are the 4 areas that we are focusing on, because this is what we're hearing from many of the people we are talking to, that these are their main concerns.
Sebastian, the technology is developing very fast, but will it bend to geopolitics? I guess when I ask this question, everybody knows what I meant. So what do you think? How is that likely to be discussed at this year's Summer Davos, which is focusing on innovation?
Exactly. Technology is, of course, also an underlying factor in some of the geopolitical tensions that we are seeing. At the same time, there are lots of common concerns around technology. So we have just run a survey around how people feel about artificial intelligence. And the concerns that people have about privacy, about machines deciding about our lives, are shared concerns. Concerns in China as much as they are concerns in the United States. And we believe that these are areas where we need more collaboration. So on the one hand, there is a risk of fragmentation. There's a risk of different standards. There's a risk around lack of trust or declining trust in the world. But at the same time, I believe that the leaders that we're gathering here understand that some of these challenges can only be solved together. And we want to be a platform for this kind of strategic cooperation, as opposed to just thinking about strategic competition. That's really the core idea of this meeting.
Another thing about the debate these days is about the differences between showbiz and real discussions. We saw that so many times on TV, in the media, on social platforms. how to make sure it's not show time, but real time? Sebastian.
Well, the lines are of course blurred. We are in a real-time world where everything that one says will be transmitted within a split second everywhere, right? And for us, in a world where things are really, really complex, narratives, telling good stories is sometimes important to help people navigate it, to help people find an anchor, to help people sort of feel anchored somewhere. Because if you don't have that, things fall apart. So showmanship is a sort of a negative word, but you need to have people who give orientation, who have a story, who have a narrative. But at the same time, and that's really, really important, we have to make sure that what is being discussed is anchored in facts. It's anchored in actual truths. It's anchored in research. That, yes, you need to have some sort of narrative that help people understand what's happening, but that narrative needs to be anchored in facts. And this is one area where we oftentimes have narratives without facts. Yes. And that's where narratives are getting dangerous. That's where narratives turn into showmanship. And that is something that we have to work against. And that's why we are bringing so many scientists to a meeting like the World Economic Forum. We need to help scientists become better communicators, and we need to help communicators think a little bit more like scientists. If you lose this bridge, then you have wonderful stories, but there is nothing behind. And then it's getting dangerous.
So it's not the time to burn the bridges, but rather build more bridges.
Oh, absolutely.
With that, we are coming to the end of this edition of our special program, Let Innovation Speak. Tomorrow, we are going to continue to focus on the Summer Davos in Dalian. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of my team here in Dalian and in Beijing, bidding you goodbye from the World Economic Forum 2019.